They call you the gilded fool, Arthur. A tame lion, manicured claws but no fangs. The voice, clear yet steely, belonged to a child, emanating from the deep shadows of the Bentley's back seat. It shattered the cathedral silence of the private penthouse garage atop Sterling Tower. Outside, the Manhattan night pressed in. Rain lashed against the massive plate glass windows, overlooking a city that glittered like a shattered galaxy. Arthur Sterling, 58, the man who had single-handedly forged a multi-billion-dollar tech empire from a dusty Queens garage, stood frozen, the smart key a dead weight in his palm. A chill, one that had nothing to do with the night air, slithered down his spine. The scent of Connolly leather and polished walnut, the very aroma of his success, suddenly felt suffocating. This space, his sanctuary, now felt like a brilliantly lit glass cage, and he was the unwitting prey. His eyes adjusted, piercing the interior darkness to find their source. He saw her then, a small form, huddled on the leather, her eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the faint neon glow from the city below. There was no childish mischief in those eyes, only raw, unvarnished truth and a terrifying fear. "Who are you?" Arthur's voice was a rasp, a feeble question from a man accustomed to command. "My name doesn't matter," the girl whispered, her voice urgent. "What matters is what they're about to do to you." His initial disbelief, a defense mechanism honed by decades of ruthless negotiation, collided violently with a sickening, glacial fear. He was a titan, a self-made king. His empire was a fortress. And Caleb Vance, the man he'd mentored from a raw intern, the man he loved and trusted like a son. How could it be? The thought was a profanity. The entire architecture of his trust, a flawless crystal construct built over 20 years, was developing a catastrophic fissure. "Who is they?" he asked, though a part of him already knew the answer and was screaming in denial. "Mr. Caleb," she said, the name landing like a verdict. "And his blonde wife, Mrs. Eleanor. I was hiding in the supply closet when they were talking in the big boardroom. They thought everyone had gone home." She recounted it in broken whispers, each word a shard of glass embedding itself in Arthur's mind. "The meeting is tomorrow with the Dubai Investment Fund. It wasn't a landmark merger. It was an execution. The documents were a legal labyrinth, cunningly drafted so that Arthur, in his blind faith in his chosen successor, would sign away his entire intellectual property portfolio and his controlling shares. The price? A pittance, obscenely disguised as a golden retirement package," the blonde lady said. The little girl's voice trembled as she recited the words. "That after tomorrow, your only legacy will be a footnote on page 6 of the Wall Street Journal. The gilded fool, the toothless lion." The words echoed in his head, a venomous chorus. The initial shock receded, replaced by a slow-burning rage, a tectonic shift in his soul. The image of Caleb, his easy smile, his firm handshake, his loyal pronouncements at board meetings, all of it now replayed in his mind as a grotesque theater, a 2-decade performance. He hadn't just been financially betrayed. He had been betrayed in spirit, in legacy, in the very faith he'd placed in another human being. Arthur slid into the driver's seat, his movements stiff and mechanical. He pulled the door shut. The heavy thud echoed in the garage, a sound of metallic finality. It wasn't just a door closing. It was a chapter of his life slamming shut. He was no longer the king in his castle. He was a prisoner who had just realized his jailers were the very family he cherished most. And tomorrow, they planned to walk him to the gallows. In the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Arthur's rage did not erupt in useless screams. It crystallized. It compressed from a wild inferno into a core of ice, a cold, terrifying calm. The hurt, the sting of betrayal, gave way to a diamond-hard resolve. He was not the gilded fool. He was the lion who had built this jungle with his own claws, and in the comfort of his success, had simply forgotten how to roar. He looked at Serafina, who was curled up on a massive Roche Beaubois leather sofa, her small feet dangling high above the Persian rug. She was a sparrow in a palace. And in that moment, Arthur felt a genuine connection, something pure and untainted by the calculated smiles and transactional handshakes of his world. This child, a complete stranger, had shown him the loyalty he had mistakenly believed he was getting from the man he'd treated like a son. The decision was instant. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb flying past a list of global power players, and stopped on a name he hadn't called in 2 years, Mateo Diaz. A grizzled ex-NYPD detective who had been his head of internal security until Caleb and Eleanor themselves had persuaded him to fire Mateo under the guise of budget cuts. The truth was, Mateo had gotten too curious, too close to their initial phantom transactions. The phone rang 3 times before a weary, sharp voice answered. Diaz. Mateo, it's Arthur Sterling. A long silence stretched across the line, punctuated only by the faint sound of a distant New York City siren. Then, a dry, humorless chuckle. I knew this day would come, Arthur. I just never figured you'd be the one making the call. They met an hour later in a classic all-night diner in Hell's Kitchen, an oasis of gritty truth in a city of lies. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and bacon. Mateo Diaz, with the lines around his eyes and the calluses on his hands of a man who had seen too much, wasted no time. He opened a battered laptop, its screen glowing in the dim light of the booth. When they showed me the door, I took a souvenir, Mateo said, his eyes glinting with a veteran's vindication. A full mirror image backup of the internal server. I always had a bad feeling about the perfect Mr. and Mrs. Vance. On the screen, a hidden treasure trove was revealed. A complex web of deceit. Recovered deleted emails where Caleb and Eleanor discuss creating shell corporations to divert payments. Ghost contracts with non-existent vendors. A clear trail of dark money flowing to offshore accounts. This wasn't just a planned backstabbing. It was a cancer that had been metastasizing within Sterling Tower for years, siphoning millions. Arthur stared at the evidence of their long con, the icy rage within him growing sharper. While the 2 men were lost in the numbers and the lies, Serafina, whom Arthur had brought with him, was quietly eating a pancake drenched in strawberries. She looked up, her eyes far wiser than her years, and said something simple, yet profound. They thought you were the statue in the lobby, she said, her mouth sticky with syrup. They forgot who built the whole building. The line struck Arthur like a bolt of lightning. She was right. They had grown so accustomed to his image, the icon, the benevolent father figure, that they had forgotten the predator who built it all. Her words became the cornerstone of his plan. He would not just expose them. He would let them walk into the very trap they had set for him, using their own arrogance as the weapon that would bring them down. Dawn was breaking over the Hudson River, painting the sky in strokes of pink and orange. The plan was forged there, in the neon glow of the diner. Mateo had the digital evidence. Serafina was the living witness. And Arthur, he had the final performance of his life to give, the role of the fool on his way to the gallows. The 3 of them, the dethroned tycoon, the disgraced cop, and the invisible child, formed an unlikely trinity of justice. As they left the diner, Arthur felt a chilling clarity. His fury was now forged into a scalpel, sharp and precise, not for destruction, but for surgery. To excise the cancer that had been eating away at his empire and his soul. And that surgery was scheduled for 2 p.m. sharp. When Arthur Sterling stepped out of the private elevator onto the 80th floor that morning, he was wearing the perfect mask. It was the face of a weary man, a king ready to abdicate his throne, a father placing his absolute faith in his heirs. He played the part with a masterful subtlety honed over 1,000 negotiations. But this time, his audience was only 2 people, and the stage was his own planned demise. Eleanor Vance was the first to greet him, gliding across the marble floor in a cream Chanel suit and a smile so bright it was predatory. She embraced him, a hug that felt cold and hollow. "Arthur, you look tired," she cooed, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Don't you worry. After today, you can finally rest. We'll take care of everything." Each word was a poisoned needle against his soul, but he only smiled benevolently. "I'm counting on you both." Caleb emerged from the corner office with the confident stride of a king ascending his throne. He slung a familiar, comradely arm over Arthur's shoulder. "We're going to make you proud, Arthur," Caleb said, his voice thick with feigned emotion. "Your legacy is safe with us. This isn't an end, it's a new beginning." Arthur could see the glint of contempt in Caleb's eyes, the ill-concealed glee of a predator who believes its prey has finally surrendered. They saw him as a relic of the past, an obstacle to be gently, lovingly removed. Inside Arthur, a storm raged, waves of fury crashing against the cliffs of his self-control. On the outside, he was a placid lake. Meanwhile, floors below, another quiet drama was unfolding. Mateo, with the help of an old janitor loyal to Arthur since the company's early days, had smuggled Serafina into a small supply closet adjacent to the main boardroom. The space was cramped, smelling of old paper and cleaning solution. The girl was fitted with a small, dragonfly-shaped brooch, an innocent child's accessory that housed a high-definition microcamera and microphone, streaming live to a tablet in Mateo's hands at a secure off-site location. Her mission was not just to listen. It was to capture the final, damning moment, the instant Caleb and Eleanor, in their hubris, would admit to their scheme when they thought no one was listening. The tension tightened in Arthur's chest. He knew a 7-year-old child was putting herself in harm's way for him. 2 o'clock. The 80th floor boardroom was the apex of power, a gilded cage in every sense. A long, ebony table polished to a mirror finish reflected the Manhattan skyline. Plush poltrona, frau leather chairs, and a floor-to-ceiling glass wall that offered a godlike view of the bustling city below. It was a room designed to impress, to intimidate, to affirm that the decisions made here could move the world. The partners from Dubai, impassive men in bespoke suits, were already seated. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of billions of dollars. Arthur took his seat at the head of the table, a position he had occupied 1,000 times. But today, it felt like a condemned man taking his place in the electric chair. The thick, leather-bound portfolio, the death warrant for his legacy, was placed before him. Eleanor, with the smile of a guardian angel, slid a Mont Blanc pen across the table. "Just sign where the tabs are, Arthur." As always, she smiled, a smile that Arthur now saw was layered with cruelty and greed beneath its flawless veneer. He picked up the pen. The cold metal seeped into his skin. The entire room held its breath. From the corner of his eye, he saw Caleb and Eleanor exchange a fleeting, triumphant glance, a tiny spark of shared victory. Arthur looked directly at them, his expression a careful blank they mistook for weary acceptance. His entire world narrowed to that single moment. The ticking of his Patek Philippe watch seemed to echo in the vast room. The nib of the pen hovered over the first page, just above the dotted line. It was all just one stroke of ink away, all just one moment away in the silence before the storm. The nib of the Mont Blanc hovered, a millimeter from the paper. The silence in the room was so thick it felt as if the air had turned to mercury. Caleb and Eleanor held their breath, their eyes locked on Arthur's hand, gleaming with unconcealed avarice. Then, slowly, he set the pen down. A soft but definitive click echoed on the ebony table, a small sound with the force of a thunderclap. "Before we proceed," Arthur said, his voice unervingly calm, breaking the spell in the room, "I have a brief presentation on corporate transparency that I think our esteemed partners from Dubai will find illuminating." Caleb and Eleanor exchanged a bewildered look, a ripple of anxiety disturbing the placid surface of their confidence. Arthur gave a subtle nod towards the wall behind him. The massive presentation screen, which had been primed to display spectacular growth charts, flickered to life. But it showed no promising figures. Instead, it displayed bank statement from the Cayman Islands, decrypted emails, and Mateo's surveillance photos of Caleb and Eleanor in clandestine meetings with competitors. The flow of money, the dates, the names of shell corporations, it was all laid out with cold, clinical, irrefutable clarity. The room fell deathly silent. Caleb and Eleanor's smiles froze, then shattered like glass. "Arthur, what is this joke?" Caleb roared, his veneer of civility cracking to reveal the raw panic and fury beneath. Arthur rose to his feet, and he seemed to grow taller, more formidable. He was no longer the gilded fool. His voice was a low, powerful rumble that filled the glass and steel room, drowning out the hum of the city below. "A joke, Caleb. The joke was 20 years of me treating you like a son, while you and your wife dug my grave with my own money. You call me a lion with no fangs." He paused, his gaze, sharp as a shard of ice, sweeping over the two frozen traitors. "You forgot that an old lion still knows how to hunt. He's just more patient. This is baseless slander." Eleanor shrieked, her voice high and thin, losing its practiced composure. "You have no proof, don't I?" Arthur nodded again. And then, from the room's state-of-the-art surround sound system, a child's clear voice emerged, the recording from Seraphina's brooch. Eleanor's own voice, dripping with contempt, filled the room. "He'll sign it. The sentimental old fool will never read the fine print. By tomorrow, we'll own it all." It was followed by Caleb's smug laughter. 20 years of playing the devoted son. It will be worth every second to see the look on the old man's face when he realizes he's lost everything. The crisp, celebratory clink of champagne glasses sealed their fate. It was the killing blow. The partners from Dubai rose in unison, their faces masks of disgust and fury. The deal was dead. At that exact moment, the boardroom doors swung open. Mateo Diaz strode in, his expression cold and satisfied. Flanking him were federal agents in dark suits, moving with lethal efficiency. Caleb Vance, Eleanor Vance. One of the agents stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit corporate fraud." As the cold steel of the handcuffs snapped around their wrists, Eleanor collapsed, sobbing hysterically into a chair. Caleb, his face crimson with a mixture of hatred and humiliation, spun to face Arthur. "You'll pay for this, you old bastard," he screamed, his desperation curdling into venom. Arthur walked towards him, his voice low, meant only for Caleb's ears, each word a shard of ice. "Already have, Caleb, with 20 years of misplaced trust." He paused, looking directly into the eyes of the man who had been his world. This isn't the price. This is the bill." The boardroom was now empty and silent. Night had fully descended outside, and Manhattan had transformed into a carpet of diamonds, indifferent to the human dramas played out within its towers. The scent of victory in the air was mingled with the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. Arthur stood alone by the glass wall, staring out into the void, feeling more hollow than triumphant. He had won the battle, but the cost had been his last vestiges of innocence about the human heart, a currency he could never reclaim. The heavy wooden doors opened with a barely audible whisper. Seraphina entered, followed by Mateo. She approached Arthur tentatively, her small hands clasped together. "You did it," she whispered, her voice a soft breeze in the still room. Arthur turned, and for the first time that night, the hard lines on his face softened. He knelt onto one knee, lowering himself to her eye level. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire CEO, and she wasn't a homeless child. They were simply two souls who had found each other in the storm. For the first time, he truly saw her, not as a messenger, not as an instrument of justice, but as a person. "No," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion he could no longer contain. "We did it." A gentle quiet settled between them. The city lights reflected in Seraphina's wide eyes, making them shine. Arthur felt an urge to understand, to know what force had delivered this small guardian angel to him at the precise moment of his undoing. "Sarah," he asked softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, "you spoke of your grandmother. What was her name?" The girl looked up at him, her gaze clear and unwavering. "Her name was Grace," she said. "Grace Sterling Jones." The name Sterling struck Arthur like a bolt of lightning in a clear sky. It wasn't a coincidence. It was Providence. Grace. It was the name of his father's younger sister, the aunt he knew only through faded photographs and hushed family stories. a free-spirited woman who had renounced the family fortune and cut ties with the powerful Sterling clan decades ago to live a simple, ordinary life, a life she had called real. He looked deeply into Serafina's hazel eyes, the same shade he remembered from the old, cracked photo of the aunt he'd never met. And he saw it, his true family legacy. It wasn't in the soaring skyscrapers or the soulless numbers in a bank account. It was in the quiet resilience, the fierce courage, and the unassuming dignity of this child. Tears began to trace paths down Arthur's cheeks, tears he had held back for years. Not tears of sadness or anger, but of a profound, shattering recognition. A homecoming he never knew he was waiting for. He had spent his life building an empire of steel and glass, and he had nearly lost it all. And it was a forgotten child, a lost branch of his own family tree, who had saved him. He didn't speak of adoption, or money, or the future. Those things would come later. In this moment, there was only the raw, elemental truth. He opened his arms and drew the small girl into a protective, trembling embrace. "Welcome home, Serafina," he whispered in her tangled hair. The story ended there, in that room at the top of the world. Not with the satisfaction of revenge, but with the quiet miracle of redemption. Caleb and Eleanor had tried to steal his company, but in their greed, they had inadvertently given him back something far more valuable, his family. Arthur Sterling's true legacy wasn't the tower that bore his name, but the moment he realized the most precious thing he had ever built was a connection he thought had been lost forever. Justice had been served, but the real victory was finding grace in the ruins of deceit. And so, the lion roars, and a gilded cage comes crashing down. But the true victory wasn't the sound of handcuffs clicking shut or the sight of traitors being led away in disgrace. The real triumph was found in the quiet, profound moment of recognition between a billionaire who had lost his way and a child who had never had one to begin with. The story of Arthur Sterling and Serafina Jones is a powerful reminder that the deepest wounds are often dealt by those we let closest to our hearts. It's a testament to the devastating pain of betrayal. But more importantly, it teaches us that kindness is not weakness. Patience is not passivity. For years, Arthur's trust was seen as a flaw, his gentle nature a vulnerability to be exploited. What his enemies fail to understand is that true strength isn't always the loudest roar. Sometimes it's the quiet, calculated patience of a lion who has never forgotten who he is, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim his jungle. And who was the catalyst for this monumental shift? Not a powerful ally or a corporate raider, but a 7-year-old girl the world had deemed invisible. Serafina's courage shows us that heroes are found in the most unexpected of places. It's a call for us to look closer, to listen more carefully to the voices that society often overlooks, for within them may lie the very key to our salvation. They're the ones who, having nothing, learn to see everything. Ultimately, this isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a profound story of redemption. Arthur Sterling set out to save his corporate empire, a legacy of steel and glass. But in the end, he discovered something far more valuable, a legacy of blood, of loyalty, of family. It forces us to ask ourselves, what is the true measure of our lives? Is it the towers we build or the connections we mend? Is it the wealth we accumulate or the grace we find in the ruins? Stories like this are more than just entertainment. They are mirrors reflecting our own struggles, our own hopes, and the enduring power of the human spirit. If this story of justice and unexpected family touched your heart, please take a moment to show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps our channel grow and tells us that you want more content that moves you, just like this. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that their quiet strength is a superpower, or that hope can appear when it's least expected, share this video with them. You never know whose day you might change with a single, powerful story. Most importantly, if you believe in the power of storytelling to inspire, to heal, and to uplift, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Story Precious, and ring that notification bell. We have so many more precious stories waiting to be told, filled with moments that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark, and we wouldn't want you to miss a single one. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Remember to look for the heroes in unexpected places and never, ever mistake kindness for weakness. Until our next precious story, take care.